Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I am just north of Charlotte in the town of Huntersville, which is also in Mecklenburg County. And in today's video, we're going to talk about the very last battle in the American Revolutionary War that was fought in Mecklenburg County. This might be the most famous. If it's not the Battle of the Bees, it'll be this battle, which was called the Battle at Cowins Ford. There are quite a few monuments and markers up here, and so I want to just go on a tour and show you everything I can while we talk about this battle, the Battle of Cowins Ford. Hello everyone! Today is our sixth and final battle that was fought during the American Revolutionary War in Mecklenburg County, the Battle of Cowins Ford. In doing research for this video, I found that there's more documentation about this battle than about any of the others fought in Mecklenburg County, and this video could easily be hours long if I didn't cut down the narrative somewhat. All of my sources are linked below, but if you Google this battle, you will find many more sources online as well. It was a pretty significant battle in the Southern theater of the American Revolutionary War. Today, we are going to the most northern ends of Mecklenburg County, to areas around the beautiful Lake Norman, to look for monuments and markers to commemorate this battle. The actual battlefield itself was flooded in the mid-20th century by the construction of Cowins Ford Dam, when Duke Power Company dammed up the Catawba River to generate hydroelectric power, creating a 32,000-acre lake known as Lake Norman that has 520 miles of shoreline. The dam was probably built at least partially on the exact ford used by the British Army to cross the Catawba River in 1781. Much of the land that now lies underwater was farmland, forest, and small communities. There are plenty of things to look at up this way, but we're going to have to use our imagination while we talk about the Battle of Cowins Ford. Despite constant, irritating skirmishes with the Patriot forces, the British were winning at almost every major battle in the fall of 1780, and they believed that they were on the verge of crushing the American Rebellion. The battle at Camden in August of 1780 was a crushing loss for the Patriots, as General Horatio Gates was utterly routed, his army destroyed, and morale plummeting. Gates fled from that battlefield in disgrace, leaving American forces in the South leaderless, disorganized, and demoralized. Cornwallis was able to march straight towards the city of Charlotte, which fell into his hands like overripe fruit from a tree on September 26th. The Battle of Kings Mountain in northwestern South Carolina on October 7th marked a major turning point in the war, however. Skirmishes continued, such as the Battle of the Bees and the constant skirmishes that eventually led to the battle at Bradley's Plantation, preventing the British from being able to properly resupply and press onward with their strategy. By December, Cornwallis decided to abandon his strategy of marching northward in his conquest of the South, and he retreated to Winnsboro, South Carolina to regroup and figure out a new plan. Meanwhile, the South needed a new military leader after Horatio Gates was formally relieved of his position by Congress following his humiliating defeat at the Battle of Camden. General George Washington decided to appoint a man named Nathaniel Greene into that role in December of 1780. Greene was one of Washington's most trusted generals, and although he had very little formal military training, he had shown exceptional skills in logistics, strategic planning, and resilience. Greene had already served in several campaigns in the North, including Trenton, Brandywine, Germantown, and Monmouth, and had exhibited skill at managing the Continental Army's scarce supplies. Unlike Gates, Greene's strategy was deliberate and pragmatic. He believed he could wear down the British through attrition, mobility, and guerrilla support, which made him a perfect fit for the chaotic skirmishes going on in the South. Disorganized, but successful at frustrating and thwarting the British. Greene just needed to figure out how to turn this chaos into a more victorious level of success. Greene's first move in the South was to divide his forces. He sent General Daniel Morgan westward while he himself maneuvered in the east. This strategy confused and stretched out the British lines, leaving Cornwallis, who still had not finalized his own plan of attack, forced to make a decision on how to proceed. Greene's new strategy was an immediate success at the Battle of Cowpens, South Carolina, in January of 1781, which was one of the most brilliantly executed battles of the entire Revolutionary War. I'm hoping to visit the Cowpens battlefield site sometime in the future and elaborate on that battle more than I'm going to do here. In brief, Greene's General Daniel Morgan lured the hated, feared, and dreaded British Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton into a trap of sharpshooters, militia, and regulars. When Tarleton's men charged into the line, they were met with withering fire and a devastating counterattack. British casualties were heavy, and Tarleton barely escaped with his life. The victory at Cowpens electrified Patriot morale, but Greene knew it was only a matter of time before Cornwallis would seek his revenge and try to crush the Continental forces. Greene's men were outnumbered and poorly supplied, and he knew their only hope of survival was to make a strategic retreat into and through North Carolina, hopefully making it all the way to Virginia. Predictably, Cornwallis was enraged at the defeat at Cowpens, which had cost him some of his best troops and greatest minds. Eager to crush Greene before Greene could regroup, Cornwallis began an aggressive pursuit across the state of North Carolina, known as the Race to the Dan. But Greene was conducting a masterfully strategic retreat, eluding Cornwallis at every turn and leading him on a brutal chase through the rough, wintry terrain. On January 31st, Cornwallis was moving his army through northern Mecklenburg County despite heavy rain, fearing any further delay would cause him to lose his chance of destroying Greene's army. And that leads us up to today's story about the Battle of Cowins Ford, fought on February 1st, 1781. It was a key moment in this cat and mouse game Greene was playing with Cornwallis. Greene was a master at using rivers, terrains, and local militia to delay and foible the British, and the Catawba River became the perfect natural barrier to slow Cornwallis's pursuit. On February 1st, 1781, Nathaniel Greene and his men had already managed to cross the Catawba River at Cowins Ford. Greene, General Daniel Morgan, and General William Lee Davidson allegedly sat on a log in the river to come up with their next strategy. Greene continued on with his retreat beyond the river, but left behind a rear guard of 350 soldiers with the North Carolina militia under General William Lee Davidson to defend the ford and prevent the British from crossing. Early on the morning of February 1st, Cornwallis attempted a surprise crossing of the river under a heavy fog. As British troops waded across the icy river, Davidson's militia opened fire from the opposite bank. A brief but intense skirmish followed. Sources differ on how the first shot was fired. One source says that when the British troops were about halfway across, a Patriot militiaman saw or heard them and called out a challenge 3 times before firing a warning shot, and then yelled to his comrades that the British had arrived. Another source says a militiaman heard the sound of horses approaching on the opposite bank, and running to the river found the Patriot sentries asleep. His gunpowder was wet and he couldn't fire his gun, so he ran back to the camp yelling to the others that the British had arrived. Either way, about 24 Patriots were roused and ran to the riverbank to open fire into the fog. Colonel Joseph Graham was there that day, recovered from the severe wounds he had received at the Battle of Charlotte the previous September. He was commanding a small cavalry unit that opened a first volley wave onto the front ranks of the British who were still in the water, which caused them to halt and then retreat. Pickets began to join Graham's men, and all the Patriots began firing at will blindly into the fog. More militia arrived, among them a teacher named Robert Beatty and some of his students. Side note, I imagine he is from the Beatty family that Beatty's Ford Road is named after. Robert Beatty had a mobility disability that inspired his students. One of them later wrote, "I saw my lame schoolmaster Beatty loading his gun behind a tree. I thought, I can stand this as long as he can, and I commenced loading my own gun." Meanwhile, the British Lieutenant Colonel Francis Hall started shouting orders at his men to follow him and just straight cross the river. While he was shouting orders, a Patriot cavalry rifleman shot and killed him. Hall and his horse went under, and the horse rolled over him in the river. Hall was the only British officer to die in this battle. Cornwallis himself dashed into the river, followed by a unit of guards and 2 small cannons, encouraging the men to hold fast to each other and not be dismayed by the enemy's fire. Just then, a short cannoneer let go of his gun in 4 feet of water and was washed away down the river. A sergeant threw himself into swimming after the short man and was able to rescue him 40 yards downstream, very close to where the Patriot militia were firing from the banks. The sergeant got the short man onto his feet and led him back safely to his gun. Apparently, the Patriots were so amused by watching this drama, they didn't fire a single shot at the short cannoneer or the rescuer. But immediately after he was reunited with his gun, they again began a heavy fire on them all. The horses suffered the most. The horse of the commanding officer of the assault lost its footing and tumbled for 40 yards downstream. Lord Cornwallis's horse was shot in the crossing and struggled all the rest of the way across the river before collapsing dead on the far bank. Meanwhile, General William Lee Davidson had kept most of his forces at the Lucas House, which was less than a mile away upriver, where he could respond as needed to potential British crossings at any of the several fords in the area. On hearing gunfire coming from Cowins Ford, he led 300 reinforcements there on horseback. He withdrew the Patriot line about 50 yards and ordered the men to take cover behind trees as the British started climbing out of the water. Okay guys, I'm sorry, that's as close as I could get you to the actual part of the river called Cowins Ford where the British crossed. We are going to finish this video at a nearby wildlife preserve called the Cowins Ford Wildlife Refuge. As disciplined as ever, the British exited the water and reformed a 500-foot line in good order on the banks, according to Joseph Graham. Graham wrote, "As each section reached the shore, they dropped their poles and brought their muskets and cartridge boxes to their proper places, faced to the left, and moved up the narrow strip of low ground to make room for the succeeding session, which moved on in the same manner. By the time the front rank got 20 or 30 steps up the river, they had loaded their places and began to fire up the bank. As the first British heads began to appear above the bank, Robert Beatty told his partners, 'It is time to run.'" General Davidson was near the rear of his second line at the picket camp when he was hit in the chest and fell off his horse, killed instantly at the age of 35. Beatty turned to escape but was shot in the hip and fell down. William Polk took over command of the entire unit immediately and withdrew the Patriots to the east, but most had already deserted on their own. The militia were described as being able to run so fast they had straight shirt tails flying in the wind behind them. The British were able to complete their crossing of the river over the next few hours and set up their camp at the Lucas House, where they buried their dead. The total I've seen online is that 4 British were killed and at least 36, possibly far more, were wounded. It's likely that Cornwallis seriously underestimated his own casualties and wounded because most of the wounded and killed were swept downstream in the crossing and were never accounted for. A man named Robert Henry later wrote, "A great number of British dead were found on Thompson's fish dam and in his trap, and numbers were lodged on brush and drifted to the banks. The river was stacked with dead carcasses. The British could not have lost less than 100 men on this occasion." The Patriots suffered 4 casualties, 3 captured by the British, and an unknown number of wounded. Their biggest loss was the death of General William Lee Davidson. Later that day, upon hearing that Cornwallis had managed to cross the Catawba River, General Nathaniel Greene ordered General Daniel Morgan's army to retreat to Salisbury. He sent word to his main army to head to fight if they were able, but if not, to retreat to the far side of the Yadkin River. The British were in pursuit of Morgan by the very next day. After the British left Cowins Ford, 2 Patriots returned and found General Davidson's body where it had fallen. The British had stripped his body, a common practice in wartime, and taken all of his possessions. His leather wallet containing $3.12 was missing for 183 years before turning up in London's British Museum. The 2 Patriots were able to dress Davidson's body in a suit donated by Captain James Jack. That night, by torchlight, with Pastor Macaulay conducting a brief service and Davidson's wife, Mary Brevard Davidson, standing stalwart beside the red clay grave, William Lee Davidson was buried in the Hopewell Presbyterian Church Cemetery, just 5 miles south of the battlefield. He is resting here today in good company, alongside many other Revolutionary War heroes and signers of the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence. Although the British were ultimately victorious at the Battle of Cowins Ford, the consequences of the battle helped to erode British control and strengthened American resistance. After the delay but ultimate success crossing the Catawba River, Cornwallis resumed his pursuit of Nathaniel Greene, who was continuing to retreat northward in the race to the Dan. But Greene was not retreating in a flight of panic. He was retreating in a manner of calculation, meant to wear down Cornwallis's men, exhaust them physically, mentally, and emotionally, and drain out, or at least stretch out, their supply lines. The Battle of Cowins Ford, although ultimately a Patriot defeat, served its purpose. Davidson's militia slowed the British down just long enough for Greene to create some distance and stay ahead. Cornwallis's forces were utterly fatigued and were now even further away from their supply lines. Every single mile they gained in the Carolinas came at a great cost, not just in lives, but in resources and morale. Today, we have a county called Davidson County, just north of Mecklenburg County, named after William Davidson, and it includes a college called Davidson College, and there are many, many historical markers dedicated to him. The Battle of Cowins Ford marked the beginning of the end of Cornwallis's Carolina campaign. Just 6 weeks later, he and General Greene would clash in a much larger engagement at Guilford Courthouse, an engagement that cost Cornwallis so dearly he ultimately gave up on conquering the Carolinas completely. He continued his march on to Virginia, but he found himself promptly trapped by Washington's Continental Army on land and French troops at sea. After weeks of siege, Cornwallis had no choice but to surrender. The Revolutionary War officially ended on September 3rd of 1783. Okay, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this 6th and final video in my series about the Revolutionary War battles fought in Mecklenburg County. I had a really good time learning about them, and especially coming to be boots on the ground at the actual sites where these things happened. That has been so cool for me, and I've enjoyed every minute of this series. I hope you've liked it as much as I have. I'll see you guys another day in another adventure. Bye, everybody.